In Parak of Sefer Breisheet, as I point out each time we've opened this Parak, very easy to skip it, since exciting things, dramatic things, I should say, are happening in Parak Yud Tet, and dramatic things in Parak Aleph. Obviously, the overshadowing of those events doesn't, however, negate the reality of the significance of Parak. What we've seen so far is, in a certain way, a replay of a story that happened already in chapter 12 in Parak Yud Bet, when Avram and Sarah first come to Eretz Yisrael, to Eretz Canaan. Very shortly thereafter, there's a famine. They go down to Egypt, and Avram Avinu asks Sarah Imenu to say that she is his sister for self-preservation of the two of them, really. There, we knew what the catalyst was for why they went down to Egypt. It's much less clear in the case of Parshat Vayera in chapter 20, why they went all together. We talked about that, not to belabor the point. Also, the reality that, unlike in the case of Paro, who actually first is stricken, Vayinaga Paro, there are nigaim, means plagues, essentially, that hit Paro, and according to the Medrash, his whole household. In this case, at least as far as the level of Pshat is concerned, Hashem appears to Avimelech in a dream. As the Ramban and others point out, this does not make him a prophet. It just means that Hashem appeared to him. Now, whether it means it's, so to speak, appeared to Hashem, to Avimelech, that he has some kind of a vision of a throne room or whatnot, that's not clear. However, the idea that he had a communication from the Almighty, which warded him off from falling into actual immoral behavior. And what we're up to now in Pasuk Zayin, Chet, etc., well, really Chet, is that already in the dreamscape, if you will, there's an interaction between Avimelech and Hashem, where Avimelech is a replay in his argumentation, in some level, of what Avram Avinu did with regard to Hashem in chapter 18. At the end of chapter 18, Parak Yud Chet, remember the negotiation. Well, what if not? There aren't 50. Ulai. Maybe there's 50 tzaddikim. Okay, maybe there aren't 50. Maybe it's 45. Maybe it's 40. It's going down, 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 down. The tone of it, I noted in Parshat, in Parak Yud Chet, is much more deferential. It's longer in terms of what it tells us about it. So many caveats. Avram Avinu says, "I am but dust and ashes." In this parak, none of that, and there's almost a flavor, almost of, I don't call it righteous indignation, but an element of, God, I have your number. We've been here before. Rashi quotes this idea that somehow there was a criticism by Avimelech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the destruction of the Mabul and the destruction that transpired. It wasn't a physical destruction in the sense of people being annihilated, but of the great dispersion. Two stories that, as far as Chazal are concerned, certainly have great sweep or great awareness that people have of them in the ancient Near East, such that Hagoy Gam Tzadik Tarog, back in verse 4, Pasuk Dalet, is Avimelech saying to Hashem, "You're going to kill us too, like you did to them," and almost whitewashing what happened to Dor HaMabul, that you did that for no good reason, and you're going to do it against me as well. And I pointed out when I mentioned this, we do have parallel stories, not of the dispersion as far as I know, but of the Great Flood. There is a parallel story that we have extant from antiquity, which is entirely pagan, in which the pagan gods, small g, are warring with each other. They're jealous, they're capricious. They have all sorts of characteristics that make them oversized egos, really, with superpowers and without morality. And what's interesting is, in this comment of Rashi, again, it's quoting from the Medrash, is, I think, a subtle idea that while these events, the point of the Torah was to teach us these events are not either the vagaries of the natural order. They are directed, and not only they're directed, but directed by a single force. That force is not a force like gravity is a force, which is a created force, but rather that is Elohim, that's God, who is the God of nature and the natural order, and that he cares about the morality of human beings. You'll say, really, God is so great, but he cares about little blue planet, and he cares about every individual? Well, yes. Why? How could that be? Because he's God. He's Hashem. That's the whole piece. Is that the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is at play. That's the whole idea. But here's the limitation. I say maybe in quotation marks, eight sets of quotation marks. The limitation, the self-limitation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is he doesn't control what people are going to do as a result of it. So, case in point, the way Chazal are explaining the words of Avimelech to Hashem, you could say he was, spitting teeth out at God. He was very upset because here he was being accused or maybe about to be punished for something that he didn't yet do, but he was on the road to doing. Is that here these stories happened, but the way in which they would be told would so often shape what their legacy might be. So if the story of the flood was going to be remembered as God is angry, is an angry God, and that's all he does, or the story of dispersion would be remembered that way, or the Jewish people leaving Egypt, the Egyptians in their narrative, first, who is God that we shall listen to him, and then afterwards, it's not that the entire country of Egypt bowed down to Hashem. They remained idolaters even after the fact. They had a glimpse of a moment when they woke, from their delusion, but it didn't last, and so on and so forth. And sort of the idea that there's what happens, and then there's how the story about what happens is told after the fact, means that there's something here in a certain way that Avimelech's own interaction with Hashem signifies, as far as Rashi, I believe, and Chazal therefore are concerned, signifies some kind of not yet understanding what the lesson might be of God's intervention in the world, and seeing it instead in negative terms, in threatening terms, for a sense of foreboding that something else terrible is going to happen. Now, Phil just posted the chat a great question. Why does Hashem give Avimelech a warning? He didn't give Paro a warning. Was Avimelech more moral? And the short answer is yes. That's what we're going to see now, is that Avimelech gets a warning because Avimelech's spiritual reality does involve an appreciation of, or an awareness of, a God who is the supreme God. That doesn't mean he doesn't believe in other gods, small g, right? First, we said it last time, the first of the 10 commandments is Seret HaDibrot, is I am the Lord your God. The second commandment is thou shalt not have other gods before me. If you covered over the second of the Dibrot and you just saw the first of the Dibrot, there's no contradiction between I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt and there may be a bunch of other gods out there as well. But no, the second of the Dibrot is no, there are no other gods. Do not have other gods before me. There are no other, right? Avimelech may be sort of in Dibra number one, at least as far as belief that there is one God, but not to the exclusion of other gods. Karen, good point. If we really understood all this, we wouldn't need Yom Kippur every year. So true, so true. And by the way, if this was Elul or right before Yom Kippur, I'd take an off-ramp right here and talk about how Yom Kippur and Tshuva is about the rereading and the rewriting of our own personal story. And where we have done wrong, we have the power to rewrite that story, even of the past, by making amends and fixing it now. Yeah. So, right. Okay. But we're not in Elul, and it's not about to be Yom Kippur. So I'm just going to go right back to the Tanakh. But the idea here clearly, Avimelech doesn't say, wait, who is this again? He knows. He knows this is Shem Elokim. This is a Kadosh Baruch Hu. By the way, Shem Elokim, the name of God with the word Elokim, refers to the God of justice, right? God in the attribute of justice. Midat Hadin, Breisheet bara Elokim b'Hashamayim b'Haaretz, the God who sets up the laws of nature, the forces of nature, which are not independent, as it were, of God, but they're the rules that God set up, right? And that He sustains ongoing. But God is in the background in this in the creation. You have to find Him in it, right? It's that Hasidic word that I love from Chidush Yarim, that the word for world in Hebrew, olam, is milashon ayin lamed mem, which means something that's hidden, something that is concealed. So that's part and parcel with this. Now, Avimelech defends himself. He told me this is his sister, and I did what I did with a full, with a sense of a wholesome heart, with clean hands. And God says to him, "No, I know you did it with a wholesome heart." He doesn't say with clean hands, by the way. Some of the Mepharshim point out that it means that he didn't necessarily have clean hands. There may have been things that he did that were not appropriate, and the very fact that he took Sarah Imenu, here it doesn't have clean hands, right there. So, but Hashem says to Avimelech, "I am saving you from the possibility of sinning against me." Notice verse 6, it's against me, not sinning against Avraham. Meaning, it's not just the question of, and I think Karen by now maybe finished the book, it's not just a question of the harm principle, Locke's harm principle, that all morality, Locke didn't think this, but that's Jonathan Haidt's point in his book, right, The Righteous Mind. And if all morality is reduced to the harm principle, am I hurting someone else when I do the following action? If the answer is no, then there's no reason why it should be forbidden. There's no reason why it should be off limits or taboo even. It's not hurting anybody, right? So, but here Hashem says to Avimelech, you're going to sin against me, meaning there's a moral problem here. That's my issue, right? Not that there isn't also an interpersonal, and that's the next verse. And now return the wife of this man. Why? He's a Navi. Ki Navihu. He will daven for you, he'll pray for you, and you will live. Why did he have to say that? So on the level of Pshat, sounds like the very fact that Avimelech didn't ask the right questions, enough questions, was willing to take Sarah Imenu away in some way, even though it goes on again and again, keeps repeating, he didn't touch her, he didn't go near her, right? But the fact that that happened meant somehow he had a mishpat mavet that transpired. However, the Medrash, we'll see momentarily, we're going to read a couple psukim now, so we actually learn some psukim inside. The Medrash will make a point of describing how, in fact, this was a hint to some kind of a plague that was also hitting up against the people who live in Gerar. Meaning, it's how does it know that? So there's a parallel, and so Phil pointed it out, and I started with it, so I guess I started it off, but I'll give Phil credit too, right? There's story in chapter 12 and story in chapter 20. There are a lot of parallels. So it never says in chapter 20 explicitly, Perek Chaf, where we are, that God gave a plague to Gerar, neither to its king nor its people. But it does make it sound, verse 7, like they're going to die if they don't take the following actions, or he's going to die if he doesn't take the following actions. In chapter 12, it actually says Hashem brought a plague, but Chazal, for very, very good reason, we'll see, unpack it now, hopefully today, saw that actually in Gerar, they have a tradition, there was also a plague. Why didn't it mention that there was also a plague going on in Gerar? Hold that thought. Let's learn it inside a little bit. So here we have verse 7, he's told, if you don't return her, you should know that you are going to die, you and all that belongs to you, which could be the circle of family, could be the circle of community, the whole place. It's not clear. Vayashkem Avimelech baboker, vayikra lechol avadav, vayidaber et kol hadvarim ha'ele be'ozneihem, vayiru ha'anashim me'od. Avimelech got up in the morning, and he called all of his servants, and he spoke to them, and he told them all of this, and they were very afraid. There are parallels in this pasuk that should set off bells to one other story from this pasuk, but based on the last few psukim, to yet another story beyond that. Let me not be coy. Number one, in the story of Yonah, we have that the sailors who were not Jewish, they were very, very afraid. And the idea that they were very, very afraid had implications in terms of what they did and the trajectory that therefore they were on. According to Chazal, maybe even they brought offerings in Yerushalayim after. In the case of the book of Yonah, could be that they were actually somehow converted to Judaism. Not entirely clear, but whatever it is, that's that story. Over here, what were they so afraid of? They were afraid of dying, but maybe they also now had more of a fear of God. Maybe. Karen, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I don't have the Hebrew, but in the English it says Abimelech rose early next morning, and that early next morning is a phrase that bumps up all the time with Avraham.
That's the second story I was going to mention, which
I'm sorry.
is no. That's why we're here together. So I don't have to say everything. If you get it, it's like, this is great. That's what's going to happen. It happens in several places. And as we'll see soon, there will be an analog in chapter 21. We'll probably focus on it more when we get there. But I want to make sure that we're gonna sort of put a push pin in the words here when Avimelech gets up. Look at chapter 21, verse 14. And then look at chapter 22, verse 3. So you have Perek Chaf Aleph, Pasuk Yud Dalid. And then you have Perek Chaf Bet, Pasuk Gimel. It's Avram getting up in the morning. Then dial back before it and look at Perek Yud Tat, Pasuk Chaf Zayin, chapter 19, verse 27. So I'm going to put a push pin that we not get sidetracked for what's coming in the future, because we didn't get there yet, for the story of Yishmael being sent off and of getting up in the morning for the Akedah. But if you look back at chapter 19, verse 27, here's another part of the puzzle. Didn't Avram Avinu have a negotiation with Hashem? He did. Then there was a nighttime. Then during that nighttime, there was an interaction of Malachim with Lot. There was the interaction of Lot with his strange hospitality and care for guests who are strangers, more so than for his own daughters. There's the escape. And there's at the time of sunrise, as he's leaving, Avram Avinu is getting up in the morning. So you have Avram negotiation, Avram getting up in the morning with something in between at night. You have Avimelech with a negotiation with Hashem, and then the next morning getting up in the morning. And the Torah wants you to know this. Right? Notice also, in case it wasn't apparent until now, it could just be it's happenstance. I don't think it's happenstance. Avram becomes Avraham. He's the Av Hamon Goyim, the father of many nations. And what's the name of this king? Which is probably not his proper name, but his title. He's the Avi Melech. He's the father king, Avi Melech. Yeah? It's a study it's a compare and contrast, but there are a number of pieces here that are parallel of what's transpiring. It doesn't mean that it's a one-to-one, that the story is repeating itself in another guise necessarily, but it does mean it gives us notice that there's a way in which the Torah, I think, wants to line up the actions of Avimelech in his interaction with Hashem as against the interaction between Avraham Avinu and Hashem. And Avimelech, of course, not the world's greatest tzaddik by any means, but he's not a Rasha either. Doesn't seem to be wicked per se. And this is where we have he told the people, and they got the memo. What happened when the people were told in the case of Sodom? They laughed. They didn't take it seriously. They didn't think it was real. The people who were possibly going to be saved, the sons-in-law, that story. The married daughters and the sons-in-law, I should say. So here now comes the reckoning in verse 9. Vayikra Avimelech la'Avraham vayomer lo me asita lanu ume chatati lach. Ki heveta alai va'amamlachti chata'a gdola ma'asim asher lo yasu asita imadi. Okay, now Avimelech, the pshat is that Avimelech said to Avraham, "What did you do to us? What have you done to us?" It doesn't tell us what you've done to us is, and on the level of pshat, it sounds like it's from Pasuk Zayin, verse 7. If you violate this, you're going to die. So that's what you've done to us. You've given us a mishpat mavet. We're not going to live if we don't give her back. And of course, we will give her back. So the first thing is, what have you done to us? Number two, how have I sinned against you that you have brought upon me and my kingdom a great sin? And then it throws in actions that shall not be done. Actions that shall not be done. What actions are those? Rashi fills in the gap based on the Gemara in Masechet Baba Kama that there was a makkah, a plague that never comes to any other creature, but happened to us on account of you. Now it's a strange makkah, very strange, but it would seem that other than their eyes, any bodily orifice, upper or lower, was somehow clogged, stopped, blocked. And therefore, they were concerned that they were going to die. And this was like already they were moving in the direction of death. It's the makkah. Now, it doesn't say that there was a makkah, but the words things that have not been done or shall not be done, things that we've never heard of before, you have done to me. Now notice, it doesn't say God has done to us, but you have done to us. Right? Now, is that because he doesn't believe that God has really done it? It's really Avram Avinu, as a magic man, that he made it happen? It's not clear. It's not clear what Avimelech knows and doesn't know. Hashem tells Avimelech already in Pasuk. Excuse me 1 second. Yeah, verse 7. He clarifies that that Avram Avinu is a navi. Hashem tells Avimelech that Avram Avinu is a navi. Right? He's a navi. Means Rashi thinks it means that he knows that you have not touched her, and therefore he will pray for you to get you out of the problem that you're in now, this makkah that you have. The Rashbam thinks it just means a navi, milashon niv sfatayim, who locutes with their lips. They speak with their lips. They're expressing things. And the point is that this is a person who, according to Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, that he is accustomed to being in my company, in God's company, if you will. He speaks my word. I love what he says, and I will hearken to his tefillah. Right? There's a pasuk from Divrei Hayamim we say every day in the prayer of Hodu. Al tigu b'mashichai uvin v'yai al tareu. Don't touch my anointed ones and do no harm to my nevi'im. In the case of Avram Avinu, the argument that seems to be made here, and it's to devastating effect, he represents me, and you will sin against me. Number one is the moral issue. Number two, he is my plenipotentiary. Therefore, he will daven on your behalf, and he will, and you will be saved on account of his tefillah. Avinu will daven for Avimelech and save Avimelech and all of the people of Gerar. When Avram Avinu davened and negotiated for the people of Sodom, he tried. The tefillah, unfortunately, was not successful. That was God's way. They didn't make the grade. They didn't have enough people, etc. We discussed that already, chapter 18, the verses, Perek Yudchet. But here, actually, the message seems to be that he is going to daven for them, and he is going to save them. The problem is, how do you separate out between the intercessor, who is the one doing the tefillah, and stating the words of tefillah, engaging in the patterns of speech, as opposed to confusing that with actually having and being the power that decides one way or the other. This is part of the problematic of religion. We talk about things like intercessory prayer and this and that. This is always the issue, right? The big tzaddik is going to daven, and then the cure comes. Or the nace happens. So there could be, God forbid, a confusion. Is that done by Hashem, or is that somehow done by the tzaddik? We have the Mamar Chazal. We learned in another context. Hashem says, "Tzaddik gozer v'ani mekayim." If the tzaddik makes a decree, God will listen to the tzaddik. Not that God is bound to it, but God says, I'll listen to what the tzaddik says. But look carefully at verse 9, where Avimelech, who is on one hand conveying the words of God to his people, and they're very afraid, and they realize something's wrong. But he turns to Avram and says, "What have you done to us?" All right, and verse 10. He's asking a second time, explain it to me. What did you think? What did you see? Why did you say what you said, namely to claim that she's merely your sister, instead of just saying outright, she is my wife? The next pasuk, V'yomer Avram, he explains himself. Ki amarti, rak ein yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. I said to myself, there is no fear of God in this place. V'haraguni al dvar ishti, they'll kill me on account of my wife. Now, Rashi points out that the reason why Avram Avinu thought this is because when a guest comes to town, you ask the guest, so, would you like to eat? Would you like to drink? But you don't ask the person the first question, so, is that your wife? Or is that your sister? That's not the opening question. And that seems to have been the early question of the people of Gerar. Now, it never says specifically that they asked. In fact, it just says in verse 2 that Avram Avinu just blurted it out. He told her, tell everyone that you're my sister. And then the next part is Avimelech sent for her, and she went to go be there. She was taken, right? Vayikach et Sarah. She didn't go willingly, by the way. It says Vayikach et Sarah means he took her. That's what it means. Then he has the dream overnight, and then. But here, Avram Avinu, according to Rashi at least, is saying there's no fear of God here. I said to myself, there's no fear of God. Now, is there fear of God? Well, there is now. It says in Pasuk, we just read it before, Pasuk Chet, me'od. They're very afraid. Okay, but was there no fear of God at all before that? I mean, Avimelech did hear from Elokim, from God. He listened. He did take it to heart. He did consider it a serious thing, right? So it's kind of if you will, a mixed bag. Now, why, in terms of saying, when Avram Avinu said there's no fear of God, was that really true? Or was that Avram Avinu's supposition? Right? The Ramban, really, among others, the Ramban tries to go into this a little bit. And he explains, based on the next pasuk. Let's keep reading. Gam umna achoti bat avihi, ach lo vat imi, vatihi li isha. So indeed, the truth is, she is my sister, the daughter of my father, but she's not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. Now, Rashi points out a few things to understand this pasuk, and here Rashi is pretty much in the level of pshat. First of all, on the books, a bat av is permitted to a ben noach, someone who's not Jewish. So if they're the daughter of the father, but not of the mother, they are technically permitted to be married, because among the nations of the world, not the Jewish people, the notions of paternity are different. They don't, the paternal lineage does not exist in the same way. It has to do with marriage and all sorts of things. But in order to authenticate what he was saying, that's why he used the language of, she's the daughter of my father. But how did the family tree actually look? So let me remind you how the family tree actually, and Rashi says this. She was really the daughter of his brother. Sarah's other name is Yiska, according to Chazal. Yiska is the daughter of Haran. It says so at the end of chapter 11 in the Torah. He married his niece. Haran was Avram's brother. Haran died. Haran has among his children Lot and Yiska. Yiska's other name is Sarah. That's why Lot goes along, because it's Lot and his sister, and the sister is married to the uncle. But there's one other layer. The other layer is that B'nai Banim Harei Hein Kevanim. Rashi says grandchildren are like children. And we see that sometimes it actually uses that description in the Torah. Grandchildren are called children. There are different examples. He doesn't give you examples here, but there are different examples in Tanakh where that happens. The grandchildren are called as if they are children. But Rashi then goes on to say that she is the daughter, Terach, who's the father of Avraham and Haran, was married to two women. So his wife with whom he had Avraham is not the same wife with whom he had Haran. You follow? So in other words, Terach has more than one wife. So that's why it says she's Bat Avi, but not Bat Imi. When Avram said Bat Avi and Bat Imi, he meant she is the granddaughter of my father, but not the granddaughter of my mother. Got it? Not too complicated, right? But the point is, that's what, so he was basically telling them like the family tree. He said, I didn't exactly lie when I said she's my sister, because actually with regard to Lot, in chapter 13, and again in chapter 14, if you looked up those stories with Lot, it says, Ki anashim achim anachnu. Avram self-describes as we are brethren, you and me, Lot. What does it mean? Literally, we're blood brothers. We're blood brothers. We're not blood brothers, not related that way. You're really my nephew, but I call us like we're brethren. And in chapter 14, it's going to say, Kini Shba Achiv, that his brother was taken captive. And that's a reference to Lot as well, who truly was his nephew. But the Torah uses that expression. So that's the idea. Now, the Ramban has a little bit differently. The Ramban admits, I don't really know why there's this like apologetics explaining the family tree, because if it was true that she was his sister and she was his wife, again, not his sister literally, but that they were related, and it's his wife, and they want this woman, they would have said, and he said it's my sister. So why didn't you just say also she's my wife? He did mess them up. He did say the wrong thing, right? So and he writes, and the Ramban writes, Kvar chata bahem lahavi alehem chata agdola, that actually Avram Avinu sinned against these people. He did, because he didn't actually say also that she is my wife, and he almost caused them to sin a great sin. And it makes no difference if it's true or it's not true. The fact is that he did not disclose that, and the lack of disclosure, how are they supposed to extrapolate from it? Now, meaning Avimelech is saying to Avram, what wickedness, what sin did you see against me that you thought to be so afraid to do this? Because Avimelech says, I never took women from their husbands. And Avinu says, Rashi quoting, Ramban quoting, excuse me, Ani lo yadati etchem, I did not know you. However, chashavti ulai ein yirat elokim b'makom hazeh, I thought maybe, perhaps, there is no fear of God in this place. Why? Ki rov mekomot ha'olam ein behem yirat elokim. Most of the places of the world don't have the fear of God. And therefore, therefore, when I left my homeland where I was born and I started wandering place to place, I didn't know what place I would go to. I made a condition with my wife. We made up together that de rigueur, we tell everybody in each time that we're brother and sister. We don't let on that we're actually married. The truth is, it is true because we are related. I thought it was going to save our lives. And I just didn't. I didn't see a sin among you. I didn't have time or inclination maybe to investigate. And I came to where you are. I took as an assumption that that you are like all the other places I've ever lived, which is that the people are not all that moral. So that's my default, is to assume that we'll just say that's sort of the cover story. We use each place that we go. But look at the contrast, right? In the original story, it actually does describe that Paro has to be stricken, and against his will, he gives up Sari Imenu, Vayinaga Paro. And yet in this story, Avimelech is saying, but I'm not that way, right? I'm not immoral in that way, and I do have a fear of God, a fear of the one who is in charge of morality in the world. And what the fact is, I thought that if someone would be interested in marrying her, they would actually ask, and is she your wife? But nobody asked, and so they just took her. They didn't ask me any questions. So I thought to myself, okay, the reality is there isn't Yirat Hashem here either, right? Now, there's what to discuss here about, okay, why did he make that assumption? But that's the assumption of all the places he went to, says the Ramban. And yet allowing for the reality that he did almost get them in a lot of trouble because they almost did the wrong thing. the king almost did the wrong thing. And as we spoke about in another context in the series on coronavirus, the first coronavirus Jewish history, the fact is that what the king does have an impact on the rest of the people. Sorry, someone unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, hi, Ellen. Good morning.
Yes. Good morning. I've got a couple of complaints. First of all, isn't that insulting to Avimelech to assume even Ephraim Hachiti is got butter melting in his mouth? So that's one point. Secondly, on Yom Kippur, when we read who is mutter to who, is a niece included? And then we all have a right in adjudicating, as the Medrash says, the story about the palm tree being uprooted, and so that we all, beside Nevi'im, have a say-so in judicial decisions. And that's it.
No, I think on the first point, point well taken. And we're seeing a more nuanced approach that Avram Avinu, he made an assumption about how the world is, and maybe there could have been more, at least as far as the Ramban is concerned. Rashi says the fact that when he got there, the first question was, so is she taken? That showed him right away, like, this is how these people function. This is not an opening question. Why don't you ask me something nice about Achnasat Orchim, like I'm your guest, like would you like to eat, would you like to drink? According to Ramban, though, yeah, Avimelech's point is, like, why did you make that assumption? And the Ramban is writing here, Kvar chata bahem, he sinned against them. Avram, according to Ramban, Avram Avinu, you could say, did the wrong thing. He explains why he did the wrong thing. Wasn't so strange when you consider that that's how all the people were. But Avimelech says, but I'm not that way. Okay, you're right. I didn't realize, But the idea here that somehow there's going to need to be some kind of redress between them. Avram Avinu, by the way, explains in Pasuk Yud Gimel. We'll do one more Pasuk today. Vayihi kasher hitu oti Elohim mibeit avi va'omar la ze chazdeich asher ta'asi imadi el kol hamakom asher naflo shama imri li achihu. He says, and when I was made to, when God made, we'll use Rashi's interpretation, when God made me wander from the house of my father, and I said to her, this is the kindness that you shall do with me, which is all the places we go to say that this is my brother, right? Like they made it up before, because otherwise we're going to be in a lot of trouble. It's not going to go well. And since we're going to so many different places, let's just make this the rule. The rule is you just say we're brother and sister, and we are related. So it's not really a lie. It's just we're gonna that way keep alive, right? Again, the plan, it seems, each time was that Avram Avinu therefore would have to, since he was the in loco paternus, I think would be the word, loco pater, I don't know how to pronounce it. He would be the one therefore to play one suitor off the other while they were in a given place, in order to be able to A, stay alive himself in the mores of the time, but B, also to prevent and forestall her from being taken away as such. So he explains, what the issue is and why he said what he said. Ramban, I think, Ellen, you could just go with Ramban, who says, he didn't do the right thing here. He didn't do the right thing. Based on his understanding of everything else, that's why he did what he did. But objectively, in this case, it was not the right thing. Okay. Right. And it's okay to say that. Doesn't mean it is not great. It's like that's the reality of the story. And he's still Avram Avinu. Still Avram Avinu.
Okay.
No, so it's what to think about. We're running out of time, so let me just move to one last piece here, which is a strange element, but it really teaches something within Rashi. Rashi here on the words "Vayihi kasher hitu oti Elokim mibeit avi" says, look at Onkelos. He gave you his translation, but I think you should understand it in a different way. So first of all, what does Onkelos translate? Remember that Onkelos is not is not merely an Aramaic translation. Onkelos, as far as the Gemara Masechet Megillah is concerned, has learned this Aramaic translation from sources among the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah, who got it all the way back from Nevi'im. This is some kind of almost official translation, you could say, into Aramaic of the Torah. It is considered to have a high stature. So says the Gemara and Masechet Megillah Daf Gimel. So the pasuk, according to Onkelos, is read as follows: and behold, when they were wandering and making mistakes, the nations of the world, that is, by serving the work of their hands. V'hava kad te'o am maya batar uvade yedehon. While the nations of the world were wandering, meaning they erred, they made a mistake, and they were wandering around worshiping idols. Oti, me, God took me from the house of my father, which was one of those places where they worshipped idols. Hitu, kasher hitu, comma, oti Elokim beit avi. God took me from the house of my father. That's what Onkelos has as a translation, which is really amazing. Rashi says Onkelos translated what he translated. Rashi didn't even quote what Onkelos translated. Why not? Because when you look at the cantillation, that's not actually really very tenable. The cantillation puts the word hitu, wandered, with oti, I wandered. Someone caused me to wander. And behold, when God caused me to wander from the house of my father, many of us will be thinking right now about the Pesach Seder, where we quote from the verses from Parshat Kitavo, Arami Oved Avi, a wandering Aramean was my forefather. And there's an ambiguity there if the wandering Aramean is Yaakov Avinu or if it's Avram Avinu. It's based on this pasuk. It could be Avram Avinu, because Avram Avinu self-describes as one who was caused to wander. So when this pasuk means, when God caused me to wander, when Hashem took me out of my father's house, such that I would be wandering from one place to the other, I knew I would be going to the place of wicked people. Yadati, she'avor b'makom rishon, I knew I'd be going to the place of wickedness. Therefore, I said to Sarah, this is the kindness which you shall do for me, which is as follows, the end of the verse. There's a problem, though. And Rashi says, I must translate it this way. He says, Yesh li yashva od davar davur al ofanav. Davar davur al ofanav means to make the translations or the explications that which fits the character of the context in which it is spoken. In a very subtle way, Rashi's saying, I love what Onkelos has to say generally, but I can't accept his interpretation here. Now, Onkelos' interpretation, again, is when they, the nations of the world, were wandering, meaning they were doing the wrong thing, God took me from my father's house. Therefore, I said this to my wife. But Rashi says it doesn't really fit. So Rashi instead thinks that it really means the idea here of God took me out of my father's house to wander. His grandson Rashbam reads it exactly that way. He took me from my place, that was Lechem Artzecha, and that's what he quotes. Rashbam on this pasuk says, Arami Oved Avi, means that he went to wander. He was not able to be in the same place, the same time. He was moving around. But Rashi interprets here also the reality of a certain problem, which I see now I'm over time, so I better say this inside of 90 seconds. Basically, the problem is that the Shem Elokim, the name of God here, is conjugated with a verb that is plural. So, for example, unlike the beginning of the Torah, Breisheet bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. This is part of the polemic that went back and forth between the Jewish people and various others who wanted to try to prove their point about the plurality of God and the polytheistic approach, or at least some kind of iteration that divides God into parts, pieces, elements, whatever it is, not just attributes, like one person has characteristics, but it's actually multiple or split personalities. So one of the things the Jewish people would often point out is, in the beginning, God created, and the word for God is Elokim. The non-Jews argued Elokim Yud Mem is a plural conjugation, means something in the plural, the gods. And no, said the Jewish people, in Hebrew, if that was true, the verbs each and every time should be in the plural, should be say, Breisheet baru Elokim. It doesn't say that. And 99.9% of the time, it actually uses the singular conjugation of the verb, even with the Shem Elokim. Why? Because Elokim is just God as the sum of all forces, all powers, etc. But there's only one God. But this is an exception, because when you look here, the pasuk actually says, if you read it directly, it sounds like when God caused me to wander, but when God caused me to wander, it's they caused me to wander. Why is it in that conjugation? Rashi has to address that here. By the way, that's why Onkelos read it as he did. When they wandered, comma, God took me, because there's only one God. Onkelos very interested in making sure not to run afoul of anything theological, obviously, but further to not anthropomorphize God. Don't put God in physical characteristics. So every time it says that God saw, it'll say the glory of God saw, something along those lines, to try to distance it. And here in this section, Rashi explains further along that basically in many places, don't wonder. He says, Val titma. Don't wonder by the fact that it's lashon rabim. It's in the plural form when they caused me to wander. In many places, we find within Tanakh that it's lashon elohut, meaning referring to God, lashon marut, referring to authority generally, and it is actually referring to something in the plural form. By the way, this past week's parsha, Parshat Mishpatim, Elohim lo tekalel v'nasibam chalo teor, doesn't mean don't curse God. It means don't curse the authority, the judge, right? So it can also have a connotation, some of the Shem Elokim can have a connotation of Lashon Chol. But here, says Rashi, there are a bunch of different examples. One of them is in Shmuel Bet in Parak Zion, where it says Asher Alchu Elokim, the reference to Elokim Chaim, Elokim Kedoshim. Anytime that it says Elokim, you have many times that it uses Lashon Rabim. It doesn't mean anything. It's sort of the honorific to go into the plural. Obviously, Onkelos thought it was more of an issue, so he translated it in a different way. But the idea here, I thought, and I don't know, I didn't see it anywhere, but I thought that perhaps there's something going on here related to this notion that Avimelech may indeed believe in Elokim, but he may also believe in other gods. So to use the convention of how he would understand it, that's how Avram Avinu spoke to him, and as a way of getting him towards monotheism, which is not just the belief that there is God, Shem Elokim Shem Havaya, but that he's the only God and there are no others. Not sure. We'll have to leave it there. But the idea here that Avram is trying to explain why he got to where he got to, whether you want to see it as Avram Avinu dropping the ball, so to speak, and almost causing him to sin, and that's a negative, obviously, or whether it's because Avram, a very good reason, since the way the people themselves conduct themselves, even though they had a morality, it was not an immoral place, but their morality is also skewed and strange and ornery in terms of how it deals with guests and people who come to their town, and how quickly the wife of the guest is taken away to be part of a king's harem. For next time, God willing, next week, we do have to try to parse better the question of, okay, what's this hidden makkah, this plague that's going on? Why was it left in the hands of Avram Avinu to daven specifically? Why didn't God just take it away if they were doing the right thing now? Why was that necessary? So you have to come back next week to hear that. Ad Khan for today. I wish everybody a great day, and stay warm, stay safe.